everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Drew Beeson. I first would like to thank all the new subscribers that have come in, probably from the show I just did over on the Missing Persons Mysteries channel under the Campfire Stories with Steve Stockton and Gemma Jade. So I'd like to thank both of them for having me on that show, and particularly I'd like to thank Dylan Wade Clark, who's now part of that team over there, for getting me on that show and also being a part of it. You can also check Dylan out on his channel called Creepy Unsolved, and he also does a podcast. So I'm going to put a link to Dylan's channel in the description of this video, because he does a lot of great stuff, missing persons and stuff like that. And I'll also drop in a link to Missing Persons Mysteries. I know a lot of people are familiar with that channel. So I just want to get to this particular topic today, which is one of my favorite most mysterious missing person stories that I've ever come across, and that's of Terrence Woods Jr. And I'll also be discussing the mysterious case of Connie Marie Johnson, who went missing on the same exact day as Terrence Woods Jr., only 56 miles to the north of where Terrence Woods Jr. went missing. So these two cases could be linked. Law enforcement doesn't seem to think so, but I beg to differ on that. It's just too striking of a coincidence to have two people go missing that close together that were never seen again. So jumping right into the case of Terrence Woods Jr., he went missing on October 5th, 2018. He was a freelance TV production assistant. He simply disappeared without a trace while working with a production crew for a British TV company called Raw TV. He was on location filming a TV show for the Gold Rush TV series called Dave Turin's Lost Mine. The filming for the show took place at an area known as the Penman Mine, which is a quarry that was abandoned in the late 1930s. The mine is located in a place called the Ora Grande area, which is part of the larger Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest in Idaho County, Idaho. So just a little bit more background information on Terrence Woods Jr. He was 26 years old. He was a graduate of the University of Maryland. He had been living in London, England for the past 5 years before he recently had moved back to the United States to be closer to his family. He signed up for this job with Raw TV, where he was going to be gone for about 6 weeks to do this film shoot. Terrence was living with his father in Maryland, and his father is the one who dropped him off at the airport on September 30th, 2018. That would be the last time his father would see his son alive. Terrence made it safely to Montana, where he met up with his film crew, where they began filming on their way into Idaho, eventually making their way to Elk City, Idaho, where they set up their operations to start filming around the Penman Mine. Soon after Terrence arrived in Elk City, it was about 12:58 a.m. on October 5th when Terrence texted his father, Terrance Sr., a photograph of a river running through a canyon. Later that same morning at 3 a.m., Terrence texted his father and said that he was at the hotel and that he was doing okay. Just 2 hours and 44 minutes later, Terrence texted his father again and said that he'd be cutting his trip short and would be home on Wednesday, October 10th. This was pretty unusual, as Terrence was committed to being with the film crew for at least 6 weeks. That would be cutting his trip short by a minimum of 5 weeks. Terrence's father, Terrence Woods Sr., thought that was unusual that his son would be coming home from an assignment so early, but he did not question it. He only looked at it as a positive that he'd be seeing his son again sooner than he thought. It was later on that same day, October 5th, around 5:30 p.m., when the crew was wrapping up production for the day, when the head producer, a man named Simon G., looked out of the truck he was sitting in and saw Terrence's handheld radio laying on the ground. Simon G. then got out of his truck and was stunned and amazed to see Terrence running down a 15-foot cliff and headed towards the woods. And as Simon G. would later remark, he ran like a hare, so fast nobody could catch him. The crew indeed tried to catch up with Terrence, but he was simply too fast for them. Many of them got into a vehicle and tried to meet Terrence down at a road towards the bottom of the hill that he was at, and Terrence was nowhere to be seen. The crew tried calling out to Terrence into the woods, but he did not respond. As cell phone reception was poor in the area, the crew made their way to a nearby house and used the person's phone to call authorities to start the search for Terrance. As it was already late in the day, the full-blown search for Terrence Woods did not begin until the following morning on October 6th. Helicopters using infrared heat-seeking technology were brought in, as well as 3 dog teams and ground searchers, both on foot and using ATVs. No trace of Terrance was turned up whatsoever. So those are the basics on the disappearance of Terrence Woods. And to add some background to the disappearance, it was noted by some of the crew that Terrance was really acting strange the day of his disappearance. They said that he was just acting weird. He was asked to get a particular lens out of the a lens bag, and he didn't know which lens to get, which they said was very unusual for a guy with Terrance's level of experience in TV production. He was asked by the head producer that was there, Simon G. It's G-E-E is his last name. I think his middle name is something with a G as well, but he goes by Simon G. And I think he asked Terrance to get lunch or something like that, and Terrance didn't really know how to execute going to get lunch for the crew. So they were definitely talking about he was having some kind of mental lag or something in regards to his job there, working on this particular TV show that it got reported by some of the crew. When the police were asked about some of those issues that were brought up, they couldn't really point to any specifics that Terrance did other than the lunch and the lens, but he somewhat befriended a lady that was hired, a local lady that would drive people up to the Penman Mine from Elk City on ATVs, and she was said to be really credible by the local police there. And she said that Terrance confided into her that that he was having some kind of problems with his family. There were some kind of family issues going on with him, and I thought that was a little strange. His parents had been long divorced, so it can't involve that. I'm not really sure what it could be. It's possible, and I'm just speculating here, that maybe Terrance was coming out as being gay. I don't know that. I've never read it anywhere, but they said he was real fastidious with his appearance and his hygiene. He had several female friends from England that he worked with on TV shows that spoke about how professional he was, and they always seemed to just be friends. So it's just speculation on my part. Maybe he was going to come out, and his dad wasn't really good with that because he's got 2 sisters and not a brother, so maybe his dad didn't want to see him go in that direction if he was going to come out as gay, and maybe not carry on his family name. That's just pure speculation on my behalf, because he was obviously confided into this lady that he was having some kind of family issues, possibly. They did find Terrance's diary, and he wrote in there something about a great reset, and I think that had something to do with him moving back from England to Maryland to be closer to his family. He just wanted to get his life reset. But from all indications, he was excited about going onto this job, and he had committed to it. So his sister said that she had talked to him. His eldest sister. I think he had 2 older sisters, and she said that he sounded completely fine, totally normal. Terrance had no history of mental illness whatsoever. Never had any episode. He had traveled the world. He'd been in conditions like this before. I think he'd actually been to Idaho and for another shoot on another show, and never had any issues whatsoever. So well traveled, being gone for long periods of time. Like I said, he was living in England away from his family for 5 years, so I don't think being homesick was part of it. So the family is obviously highly suspect of what may have gone on with the shoot, and the crew, they think that it's a definite possibility that foul play was involved. Now, it was a 12-person crew, including Terrance and Simon G., the head producer there. That's the first person that noticed something was wrong with Terrance, which is a little odd that the head boss noticed it, but maybe he's trained to find those sorts of things. What is odd is that Terrance had never turned up, because the way it's described is that area of woods that he ran into has hundreds of years of just deadfall trees everywhere. It's so remote where Penman Mine is. He couldn't get very far, and as Terrance's father would say, Terrance is flat-footed. He had to have special inserts in his shoes. So to hear that he was able to traverse running down this this cliff. I think it was described as about 15 feet steep that he went running down like a hare, according to Simon G. It was extremely unusual to his father because he said Terrance is not athletic whatsoever. Like he said, he was flat-footed. He had to have special inserts in his shoes, and the crew could not catch up with him. He was just too fast. It was like something possessed Terrance to just suddenly drop his radio at the end of the day and just take off like a madman into the woods. But this is what the whole crew reported they saw, including the woman that he spoke to earlier in the day that was from Elk City that was giving rides out there to the Penman Mine on ATVs, and she said she saw him do it as well, and she's said to be really credible. She's an outsider, has nothing to do with that crew other than being hired. So if there was a cover-up going on with that crew, it'd be really difficult to get, a 12-person crew not to have one person in that crew break and say, yeah, Terrance got injured, or, and we wanted to cover it up because of a lawsuit. It would just be really difficult to get 12 people to agree with that. In addition to those 12 people, you did have the lady that I mentioned, and you also had a few miners there that were working on that set. So it was probably a group closer to 20. And I think most of them saw this event. It was so bizarre when Terrance just sprinted down that cliff and into those woods. And like I said, with all the deadfall there, he just couldn't have gotten very far into those woods. And the searchers that were looking for him were convinced that he was not in there because he just couldn't gotten too far. They said between all the deadfall trees, your feet couldn't even touch the ground in many of those areas. And a guy like Terrance just isn't going to get too far into that kind of a wilderness situation. So they don't know. Maybe it was speculated that a car picked him up and took him out of the area before anyone could see it. I don't know. The whole thing is just one of the strangest disappearances I've ever heard of. So the search for Terrance obviously turned up nothing. His family was contacted the next day, his mother and father, by Simon G., who flew them out to Idaho to meet with the sheriff. And as far as I know, and still to this day, the only person that Terrance's parents got to speak to who actually saw him disappear was Simon G. I think that's highly unusual, and if I was his parents, I would have demanded to speak to another crew member, but apparently they wouldn't let him, or they weren't available. I don't know why Terrance's parents didn't get to speak to the lady who spoke to him earlier in the day that he was telling that he was having some sort of family problems. To my knowledge, his parents never got to speak to her, which is really strange. They only got to meet with the head sheriff and Simon G. I think this is a picture of Simon G here behind the camera. I'm about 90% sure this is a accurate photo of Simon G. I don't know how old it is, but I just don't understand why his family could not have talked to at least one other witness that saw Terrance run like a hare into those woods, never to be seen again. I just don't understand that. There's just so many strange things involving this case that they don't add up. I can't say foul play was involved, and I don't think they would have just made up this story about him running down the cliff into the woods. I mean, because that would have been way low on the list of believable things. It'd be far better to have staged an accident that he died, that he slipped off, or something that wouldn't have get the film crew sued. Why would they just say he took off running? That's just, I don't know. I believe that happened because just too many people saw it, and it just would have been a strange story to make up. But really strange that they only get to meet with Simon G. and the head sheriff and no one else, not the miners, and like I said, the lady he spoke to earlier that day. I would have demanded that. I mean, his parents obviously are extremely distraught. Even though it's been 2 years later, they still want to know what happened to their son, and I don't blame them. It's really weird. And one of the most odd things that Terrance's parents reported after the meeting with Simon G. and the local sheriff was that Simon G. kept bringing up Terrance's performance issues, such as not finding the lens and the issue with the lunch and stuff like that. And they were just baffled that he'd be bringing up performance issues when he's missing. I think that's a pretty much a moot point, how his performance was, and how Simon G. was disappointed in him when he's missing, and telling his parents about that. Who gives a shit about his performance issues? The guy is missing. So I think that's really weird. I think for him to bring up the performance issues just kind of show this guy's pretty tone deaf. I don't know much about Simon G, but I don't know why you would even bring that up. I mean, if he was having some kind of mental breakdown, maybe that would explain his performance issues, but I don't even see where that would be relevant in bringing that up. But not talking to anyone else, or at least one other witness that saw him run into that woods, would drive me crazy. So Terrance's parents and a few of his friends did an interview on the Dr. Phil show that was dedicated to the disappearance of Terrence Woods. And one of the most interesting, I think it was about 2 years after he went missing that they did this show. And one of the most interesting things that came out of it was that Terrence Woods Sr. had hired a private investigator to go out there to Idaho County, Idaho, to the area, to Elk City, and ask questions and see if he could dig up more information on what exactly happened to Terrance and why he took off running like a hare down into the woods, never to be seen again. And he turned up some really startling information that, if it's true, could mean a whole lot, but it's almost sensational stuff that he turned up. One was that his father, Terrance Sr., they're shown in the middle, claimed that there was a former NBA star that was there on the set, and he had two of his sons with him, two of his younger sons, and he didn't say the name of this ex-basketball player. I don't know if he was a standout NBA player or not, but it was a former NBA player with two of his sons, and that something happened out there on the shoot and apparently traumatized one of this ex-NBA player's one of his two sons to the point that he had to get counseling for it. Now, that is a massive claim if that is true. Never heard the name of this basketball player. The sheriff never brought up this former NBA player being out there on this set, but that is what Terrence Woods Sr. says on the Dr. Phil show, that there was an ex-NBA player out there with two young sons, and that something happened, or they saw something that apparently traumatized one of those sons. And of course his father thinks it was some form of foul play that or a threat against maybe Terrance, and it had something to do with what him just taking off into the woods out of fear. So I don't know. That's a crazy claim. Another thing the private investigator said that Terrance was out at a bar or something when he got to Elk City and exchanged phone numbers with a female. And I think that's kind of odd because, like I said, he just seems gay to me. I'm not saying that disparagingly against him. It's just how he strikes me. So him exchanging numbers with a female just kind of seems like a really weird story in itself. And also considering the time that Terrance was texting his father that late at night, just seems kind of like an odd story that it was out at a bar like that. So I'm kind of skeptical of this stuff that this private investigator found. But the thing with the NBA player is very interesting, if that could be true. But if foul play was involved, it'd be extremely difficult to cover it up with the amount of people there. I just think it's odd that the family never spoke to anyone else that saw him run into those woods. You think that they would just demand it, and I guess Simon G just wouldn't let the rest of the crew speak to him. They just thought, this is a tragic case. We did everything we could. We couldn't find him. And another thing that's really, really odd to me is that the police never did a forensic search of Terrance's laptop, which was left behind in his hotel room. And they also never searched his cell phone records. Terrance did have his cell phone with him when he ran off into those woods. So it's extremely odd. They never got a subpoena or whatever they needed to do to search those records. And according to the police, they said they only do that in cases where they think someone's in some form of imminent danger. Well, obviously he can't be found. He just ran into the woods with no survival gear. I would call that definitely a threat to his well-being. So I don't understand that either, why they never searched his cell phone records or his laptop. And I don't even know if that it's been done to this day, and why it was never done in the first place. They figured that he voluntarily disappeared by running into the woods, and it didn't warrant them doing any forensics on the cell phone or the computer he left behind. Another strange thing is when they went to Terrance's room to get some articles of his clothing for the tracking dogs, it looked like people had already gotten into his room and had gone through some of his things, which was another thing that was kind of odd. His father did get his suitcase back, and everything looked pretty much in order, other than, some of his pants didn't have mud on them, and they should have. Just some real strange things that his father noticed with his suitcase, but everything looked, like it was just unused, rolled up neatly. Like I said, his parents said he was very fastidious about his clothing, and the way he packed things and did things was very neat and organized. And his father just thought that was really weird that he hardly used any of his clothes and there was no mud to be found. And this is just one of the strangest disappearances ever. So as far as his parents are still concerned, they think some form of foul play had to have taken place because Raw TV has not been that forthcoming to them in their opinion. From what I found out about Raw TV, there is kind of a culture there, kind of, I guess you would call it a good old boy culture. I don't know how any of that would apply to this case. It's an English company, but they said they kind of play favorites, and they do, had some kind of a bad reputation like that. I don't know if that could have played into it or not. Obviously, Terrance went missing. He's African American. He went missing in Idaho County, which is, the pretty sparsely populated, but very white, and they claim that maybe there was some kind of fix on Terrance because he was African American. And so a lot of people wanted to look into that angle, but I just don't see anything there. It's just really odd. It's like something came over him earlier that night. There was definitely something going on with Terrance because he would not have cut a trip that short that early, when he's pretty committed to his career. He would not be doing something like that. There was something going on with him that made him want to tell his father that he was coming home early and not finishing this assignment. So did he see something earlier in that trip, maybe on the way to Elk City from Montana? Did he see someone do something and he was afraid of what he saw? I mean, that could be possible, and maybe he was threatened and he figured the only way to save himself was just to run off into the woods and get away from this imminent threat, maybe from someone at the crew that he saw do something to somebody else. It's possible. I mean, it just something was really bothering him, and maybe that's why he felt he needed to come home early to try to remove himself from the threat. And later that next day, he probably felt like there's just nothing else he could do but run away until whoever, even if it wasn't real, maybe it was just perceived in his mind. So that is the sad case of the disappearance of Terrence Woods, and as a recording of this, he still has not been found. Not a trace of him, not any of his clothes, shoes, phone, nothing has been found. So now I want to move on to the equally baffling case of Connie Marie Johnson. Connie Marie Johnson went missing on the same exact day as Terrence Woods Jr. and only 55 miles away, due northeast from where Terrance went missing near the Penman Mine in Idaho. Connie went missing in an area called Big Fog Mountain, where she had been previously an experienced forest ranger up in that area a long time. And at the time she went missing, she was actually a cook for hunters in the area. So I want to briefly read this excerpt on Connie's disappearance. Connie Marie Johnson was last seen at Big Rock Base Camp in Idaho County, Idaho, 14 miles from the town of Powell, on October 2nd, 2018. She worked as a camp cook for Ritchie Outfitters, which organizes hunting trips in the Montana and Idaho wilderness. The place she disappeared from is only accessible on foot or by horseback. She had previously worked as a wilderness ranger for the U.S. Forest Service, and her friends said she had amazing survival skills and 25 years of wilderness experience. She was last seen when the hunters left the camp. The next day, on October 3rd, the hunters had radio contact with Johnson, but were unable to understand what she was saying. She has never been heard from again. When the hunters returned to the campsite on October 5th, Johnson and her border collie dog named Ace were both gone. She had left her jacket behind on a table, lying on top of her gun. The search for Johnson was called off on October 16th. 3 weeks later, Ace was found wandering alone at the Moose Creek Ranger Station, about 15 miles from the campsite Johnson disappeared from. Although underweight, the dog was in good health. Just a few days after he was found, Ace was taken back into the area where Connie went missing in hopes to find her. It turned up absolutely nothing. It has been now over 3 years since Connie went missing, and not one shred of evidence of what may have happened to her has ever been unearthed. So what may have happened to Connie Marie Johnson, such a experienced forest ranger up in the area where she went missing, knew the area better than anyone, just to turn up gone without leaving a note or any indication of what may have happened? You think she would have at least tried to write something down, knowing the hunters would return by the 5th, and could hopefully point to direction or lead some indication of what may have happened to her. Maybe something like a medical emergency, or uh, maybe some people had given her trouble earlier in the day and she was afraid for her life. Maybe she could have written that down somehow, and they would at least have some form of information to go on as to what may have happened to her. As mentioned earlier, she did leave her gun behind, which I find unusual. If she felt she was in some kind of imminent threat or physical danger, I think that's really odd. Why was Ace found later on without being able to go track where she was left? Usually a dog will go find its owner, even in an area that vast. They can sense things for miles and miles, but Ace was unable to find her. What message was she trying to get through to the hunters that had happened? Something strange was going on. I mean, no one knows because Connie wasn't around anyone but Ace to report on what her mental state would have been like leading up to her disappearance. I just find the fact that she goes missing on the same day as Terrence Woods and about 55 miles away in such a sparsely populated area. I believe these two were connected. I don't know how. Either foul play, maybe Terrence Woods, like I mentioned earlier, ran into something that he saw that he shouldn't have, and that might have had to do with Connie Marie Johnson somewhere further up the line. I don't know. It's just these two are just. That's not a. It sounds like a long distance, and it is if you're in an urban area, but not out in the middle of Idaho County, Idaho. 55 miles is not that far when you're talking about such rural places and no one around and just creeks and trees. I just think these two are linked. I don't know why. And I think that aspect needs to be looked into a little deeper. Could there be something alien, supernatural, Bigfoot going on here? I don't know. But the fact that two of them go missing on the same day and roughly the same area is extremely rare. I think there was even a third disappearance up there close to these times, not on the same day, but I think there was one maybe even 2 days later in kind of the same general area in Idaho County, Idaho. But I just think these two are linked somehow. I don't know how, but they definitely need more research into what's going on. Like I said, what the investigator found out for Terrence Woods Sr. and the basketball player and the bar and all this, it needs to be looked into a little bit more, in my opinion, and I'm going to do that as well. If you like missing person stories, definitely go check out my book, Out of Bounds, about the Yuba County Five. I think that's the greatest missing person story in American history and most fascinating. It's called Americans, the Outlaw Pass Incidents, for a good reason. Fascinating story. Please go check this book out if you can. Thanks.